In this video, we are going to take this photo and with a little bit of Lightroom, a little bit of Photoshop, and really a number of different color tools, because there isn't just one rule where you have to use one. We're going to turn it into this photo. It is that time of year again. It's the fall, probably one of my favorite landscape times to be out there shooting. I just love the fall colors. And I thought it'd be appropriate to do a tutorial to just show you some tips for editing those fall colors, some different color options for you. Between Lightroom and Photoshop, I'll actually use a little bit of both in the tutorial here. And the idea is not to say that there's one rule for you have to use this, because different parts of the country and the world have different colors. You know, some places have just more yellows, some places have oranges and reds, and sometimes they're in sunlight, sometimes they're in shade. All of these factors weigh into the fact that one tool is not going to do everything for you. So that's why I wanted to give you a couple of different options here. When it comes to editing your photos, let's go ahead and dive in. This is our photo. I'm starting off inside of Lightroom. This could just as easily be Photoshop for you. So let's take a look at the first way that we can boost our color. Honestly, before we do that, we have to work on the overall tone. I got to pull back on the highlights a little bit, open up the shadows here. So, I'd say before you're going to do any color adjustments, get your overall exposure and toning the way that you want. So by pulling back on the highlights, opening up on those shadows a bit, I hold down my Option or Alt key, go to whites, and that's going to give me a good white point. Option or Alt key on blacks, and that's going to give me a good black point. All that does is add contrast. You could add contrast any way you want. You could use the contrast slider, you could use a tone curve. Get away from thinking that there's a rule to it and you have to do it a certain way. So in the end, all I wanted to do was just a little bit more snap of some contrast to it. One last thing I'm going to do as far as toning goes is just, rather than pull the highlights all the way down for this one, what I'm going to do is go to my graduated filter and pull a little bit of the highlights down here, because what it'll do is it's just going to work on that part of the photo. And that's way too dark, of course, but that's just going to work on that part of the photo rather than pull some of those nice bright highlights down, especially down in some areas down here. Rather than pull them all down throughout the photo, I can just do it in this part of the photo. It's also going to let me put this filter at the top. It's really flat back there, so I'm going to use dehaze, and that's going to add a little bit of snap. I can open up the shadows so it doesn't get too dark. It's going to add just a little bit more contrast and color back there as well, so it doesn't look so flat and muted. It's okay for it to look a little bit darker because depth is a good thing in the photo. We don't want it to look as bright as everything else in the photo, because that takes the depth away. So depth is a good thing. It's just, in this case, I wanted a little bit more contrast back there. So you can see before and after there. It's subtle change, but makes a difference. Maybe even add a little bit more warmth to it here. All right. And one more thing. So since I did redo the sky, I'm going to go back to my whites, Option or Alt click, and push that a little bit further, just because I know I made some adjustments to that sky here. All right, so maybe something about there, and then a little bit of dehaze just for, again, a little bit more to remove some of that haziness, especially in the background. So far, we've got our before and our after. Sky looking a little bit too bright to me, so I'm just going to pull it back, or I should say dark. I'm just going to pull that adjustment back just a hair from what I did. So let's talk about adjusting color. A couple of ways we could do, especially for fall colors. Number one, profiles. They're a great way to do it right at the top of the basic panel. And we can come over here, your camera raw, your Adobe raw, or camera matching. Those are both great places to start. Only going to work on raw and DNG files, not on JPEGs and TIFFs, but the Adobe landscape is always a good one. It's always one of my favorites. And sometimes when I don't really feel like spending a lot of time on something, which sometimes I don't, I'll just go in there and I'll add that profile. And I think, you can see before, after, does a great job, especially on some of your fall colors there. So that's a good one. Your camera matching ones, these are going to be different for everybody. So you're not going to see the same ones I have, unless you're shooting, this was an A7R4, I believe. So camera deep, the deep one, that does a nice job on some fall colors too. So go through your profiles, go through some of the artistic and modern ones too. There's some really interesting profiles in there that, depending, fall colors are different for everybody, depending on where you are. Sometimes Out west and just with the aspens, they're all yellow. When you go to different places, you got a lot of oranges and reds and things in there. So they're all going to work a little bit different. Just trying to give you some ideas here. All right, that's one way. Another place that we can go to is HSL. Hue, saturation, luminance. And in this case, I'm going to favor the reds. So I'm going to pull this over. I'm going to favor some oranges here. So I'm going to pull that over. Favor some of the yellows to make them orange. Yellow and orange and red tends to give us that fall color feel. So anything we can do to get them away from green, get them to some more of those orange and red type tones. Saturation, you might not want to go too high on any of these settings here, but you can boost the colors. And then luminance, play around with that. You can make them brighter or darker. You don't want the reds to be raspberry red, but you can make some of those colors a little bit brighter or darker there as well, and that can give you a really nice effect. So if you just want to see the HSL adjustments, that's before, that's after. A little bit orangey to me, but again, we can pull back on any one of these sliders here and start to adjust it, and see where that takes you. I'm going to hold down my Option key on Mac, Alt on PC, reset saturation, go back to hue, reset luminance. Again, Option Alt. If there's a group of sliders and you hold down Option or Alt, you should see a reset button at the top of the group. Not all of them, but if you see it there, then it works for that group. Okay, so that's one place that we can go. Another place that we can go is calibration, and I like this one a lot for fall colors. What we can do, and this is probably new for a lot of people, again, keep in mind, guys, there is no right or wrong color. You'll hear people say, oh, I prefer the color over here. It's exactly that. It's a preference. Don't let anybody tell you it's right or wrong. An adjustment is better or worse or anything. Color is a very personal topic, a very personal choice in what you do in your photos. So, again, for me, sometimes the mood hits me and I like calibration. If you never used it, grab any adjustment you've never used before and just test the extreme boundaries. And you'll start to see, okay, so the red primary is working on the reds if I go to the left. So that could work for me. I can boost the saturation here a little bit too. Green primary, I go to the left, it's going to make things very yellowy green. I go to the right, it's going to make them a little bit more orangey. Well, we know we want orangey red here, so I'm going to go to the right. Maybe boost the saturation there. Blue primary, left, wow. Right, wow, ugly. Maybe not move blue primary either. If anything, a little bit more toward that left. It doesn't have to go all the way toward the horrible radioactive color, but a little bit over there. And then again, boost that saturation a bit. But you could do some really nice color changes. Again, forget what the technical terms of all these mean. Just drag the sliders and see what looks good. So if you turn it off, you can see that's before. And then that's after. In fact, let me zoom into a part of the photo. Before, after. So just boost some of those oranges and reds inside of there. Okay. So that's another way that you can go. You always have to be careful. You're not going to do too much. My sky might be getting a little bit magenta colored here because of some of these adjustments. So you either have to pull back on an adjustment or use some type of a local adjustment up there toward the sky. And then there's nothing saying you can't use all of these together. I've used each one of them separately, but you could combine them all. I'm going to go ahead and let's just hold down our Option or Alt and just reset everything inside of calibration. And I'll show you the one last way to do it, which would be I'm going to jump over to Photoshop. So we'll do Photo, Edit In, and I'll jump over to Photoshop. Once I'm there, I'm going to go over to my Adjustments panel, and you can always just go to Window, Adjustments if you don't see it on the right-hand side where I have it. And what you're going to look for in the Adjustments panel is the one that looks like a grid. Okay, just a plain old grid, doesn't have anything on it. It's called Color Lookup. So I'm going to click on Color Lookup, and then it's going to open up the Properties area for that. And you're going to choose this Load 3D Look. Forget what all of these things mean and all that, because trust me, what it is doesn't have any bearing on the fact that it just looks cool. So when I go through here, there's a lot of different ones that you can do. We can do Crisp Warm, which is way too much here, but we can always reduce the opacity and bring it back up a little bit. So that can be a good one for your fall colors. And then another good one for your fall colors is actually called Fall Colors. So that one looks good as well. So that's before, That's after. Again, very orangey yellow type of tones here. You can always reduce your opacity. It comes with a layer mask. You could paint it in and out of certain parts of the photo. So you don't just have to reduce the opacity overall. You can just paint it, for example, paint it out of the sky. Just take my brush tool, set the foreground color to black, and then just go and remove it from the sky because it's starting to make the sky a little bit yellow and orangish as well. So I could paint it out of the sky and again, reduce the opacity. Use any of your normal layer tools that you want to go in there and just adjust that part of it. And then if I end up back over here inside of Lightroom, by the way, once you make your Photoshop changes, all you got to do is just do File Save. You don't have to change the name or the location or anything. And that'll take you back over to Lightroom. But if I were to finish this up, a couple of little things would just be, because it's kind of bugging me here, I'm going to go to my crop tool and I'm just going to crop in a little bit from the bottom. And then I'm going to rotate this around just a hair. Just looking at these trees, they should be perfectly vertical. So looking at the trees and a little bit of some of those light and telephone poles off in the distance there. Just had a little bit of a tilt to me. And then lastly, I would go under effects and throw a little bit of a vignette on here. Just like that. It almost has a natural vignette. So I don't need to get really crazy with it because it almost does have a natural vignette around it because the bright spot is in the middle. A lot of what's around here is shaded. So I don't need to do too much, but this will just help funnel our attention in and just gives us a nice, finishing focal point to it. So while I did use a few different options here, I'll just have on the screen, you can just see the before photo. And then after, I think this was a little bit of a combination of HSL and some of the calibration adjustments. So here is our after. I also didn't really talk too much about vibrance and saturation. And then those are two ways that you could adjust the color in your photos as well. There's also a very little known trick with vibrance and saturation with the local adjustment tools inside of Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw that really sneaks by a lot of people. So I have another video on that I did a while ago. If you're interested in watching and learning a little bit more about what that secret little trick is, that would be a great place to go next.